Goeiemôre. Ek is François de Kok van Senwes. Goeiemôre aan almal in die ateljee, aan die paneel en ook almal wat aanlyn kyk. Oor die laaste dekade of wat het die kollig op landbou net groter en groter geword. Ons as industrie lewer 'n wesenlike bydrae tot groei in die ekonomie en dit ten spyte van uiterste klimaatskommeling, probleme met veiligheid in landelike gebiede, vervalle infrastruktuur. Nou, leierskap, passie, trots, entrepreneurskap, dis tipies die fundamente van die boer in Suid-Afrika. Maar hoe vertel ons storie? Hoe skryf ons narratief? Hoe skryf ons persepsie? Annelie, vir julle in die paneel, ons wil graag van julle hoor vandag. Ons luister graag.
Agriculture feeds the nation. It creates jobs. It drives economic activity across rural South Africa. And thanks to concerted efforts, agriculture is no longer invisible. Its voice is growing. Its presence is being felt. The real question is, what is it doing with that voice? In today's world, perception still matters. But perception is no longer just something to respond to. It's something to shape. Because agriculture story is not only being told on farms, it's being shaped in boardrooms, in policy debates, in the media and in the public imagination. From land reform to sustainability to food prices, the narrative is active. The question is, who is driving it?
Agriculture in South Africa is a remarkable success story. We've seen record harvests, we've seen record returns, we've seen technological innovation that takes agriculture as an industry leap years forward. We've seen creative leadership from agricultural leaders which seeks to take farmers into a difficult environment and help farmers navigate a difficult political, social and economic climate. But the time certainly has come for agriculture to demand a seat at the table. All South Africans find themselves in a difficult spot as far as our politics and economics and our social environment is concerned. And if I look at agriculture, I associate it with resilience. I associate our farmers with creativity and innovation. And I associate our agricultural industry as one that definitely punches above its weight. The agriculture industry, I think, is more than the sum of its parts. And now is the time for agriculture to demand a seat at the table, to ensure good governance and ensure accountability from our political leaders and office bearers. This is not to say that agriculture should rescind its role as an economic powerhouse, but rather agriculture should communicate to the rest of the country that it is part of the solution, it's always been part of the solution. And I think agriculture is certainly the most innovative industry in South Africa today.
Because when a sector does not actively direct its narrative, it becomes passive, reactive, and in that space, influence is not converted into results. Policy is shaped from the outside and opportunities are lost. Because narrative is not just about reputation, it's about power, it's about influence, and ultimately, it's about outcomes. But this is not only an external challenge, it's also a question of leadership within agriculture. Is the sector aligned? Is it strategic in how it engages? And is it using its voice to drive real change, or simply to respond?
You often find that the communication that agriculture puts out relates solely to the challenges. And understandably, the agricultural sector does have challenges, but we also have such a good story to tell. And there's immense opportunities in the sector. And I do feel that sometimes we don't relay this in a unified manner. Very often as well, you can find that there might be different voices speaking on behalf of agriculture, and as soon as there are challenges, you'll find this schism or this break where, in actual fact, 99% of the issues, whether it's large farmers, small farmers, agribusinesses, primary agriculture, very much aligned on these issues, and it's worth reinforcing them to the public, especially in the realm of policy making. Once you're confronted with a negative perception and policymakers react to that, it is very difficult and you're already on the back foot. So I do think that we have got a great responsibility to also tell the good stories in agriculture, what we are doing and the enabling environment that we do have, and then sneak in some of the challenge that we have and also obviously suggestions in terms of how we can remedy that.
So the question is not whether agriculture has a voice, it does. The question is, Is that voice translating into impact? Is it shifting perceptions where it matters? Is it influencing the decisions that shape the sector's future? Or is there still a gap between being heard and making a difference? In a world shaped by competing narratives, who is driving agriculture's voice, and to what end? Welcome to the conversation. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for the slight delay. As you can see, there are still 2 empty chairs. We are waiting for 2 of our panelists to make it through the traffic. They will be joining us shortly. The scene setter we just watched asks an important question. So agriculture's voice has undeniably become more louder, it's become more visible, more influential, but unfortunately, influence is not measured by airtime, headlines, or social media reach. It is measured by outcomes. And that's what really this discussion is about this morning. I'm Anli Hutting. It's a privilege to facilitate this discussion this morning. And today we move beyond storytelling into strategy. How does agriculture communicate with greater intent? How does it build influence? And how does it convert narrative into action? I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our panelists. To my left here is Dr. Mpumelelo Mkhabela, political analyst, former editor, academic and respected commentator on South Africa's political landscape and media environment, with senior editorial experience at publications including the Sowetan Daily Dispatch and the Sunday Independent. He brings that valuable perspective on political messaging, political discourse, and how sectors succeed or fail influencing national debate. To Dr. Mpumelo's left is Helena Wasserman, editor of News 24 Business and one of South Africa's most experienced financial journalists. Helena has spent more than 2 decades shaping business and economic reporting across platforms, including Fin24, Finweek, Sake24, and Business Insider South Africa. So she brings that deep insight into how media frames economic sectors, how narratives gain traction, and how public perception is formed in the media space. On the end there, we have Nick Sarfontein, no stranger in the agricultural sector, famously known as the man who wrote a letter to the president, but beyond that, chairman of the Sarnik Group. He built one of South Africa's leading integrated beef businesses, spanning breeding, beef production, processing, and retail. He's widely recognized for his involvement in national conversations around land reform and agricultural development, including serving on the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform. The 2 speakers who find themselves not yet present are Professor Johan Kirsten. He's a professor of agricultural economics and director of the Bureau for Economic Research. You'll see them often on the news delivering commentary about economic issues and then within that, the food production sector. He's got more than 3 decades of experience in agricultural policy, rural development, and commodity markets. He's one of the country's leading voices on agricultural economics and policy engagement, and author, alongside the other panelist who's missing at the moment, Wandile Sihlobo. They have written a couple of books together. Wandile Sihlobo, of course, is the chief economist at AgBiz. He's the presidential envoy on agriculture and land and a member of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. We're hoping he's been on a call with the president and that's why he's late, but we'll ask him when he gets here. He's widely recognized for bringing data-driven...
Ja, Boetie.
Boetie. Wandile, is Prof. Johan with you? He's just being mic'd. Okay, I was just finished introducing you to the panel, to the audience. So Wandile also has a podcast called AgriView with Wandile, where the aim is to bring regular, consistent, data-driven communication to the public. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome. You're just in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, to kick off the discussion, I want to ask one question to all of our panelists. I know you've been on the road, so we'll give you a moment to think, to get past the stress of navigating the traffic. We'll start with you, Mpumelelo. What do you think, from your experience and your background, is the biggest issue with how the agricultural sector communicates or fails to communicate? So we're starting with the narrative and then we'll move to the outcomes a little bit later.
My view, this is my preliminary thoughts, is that agriculture has not been actively involved in generating the messaging. Often it reacts and other people take on the message and run with it. And down the line, damage is done, key sectors now react. But even in instances where the story is not a negative story, it's a good story. I mean, labor force survey is released. There's good data about how agriculture is doing in terms of employment. GDP numbers are out. There's good data about how agriculture is contributing to the economy. You still don't find that seizing of that positive story and run with it and say, the reason why we're generating these good benefits for the country and for the sector are the following. Can we strengthen them or can we grow them? Ministers of Agriculture and DTI, they go abroad, open new markets. They communicate about what they've done, but you don't find that all-embracing universal message to say, this is actually our sector, the whole country. Whether it's agricultural people or non-agriculture people, but everyone embracing to say, this is our story, we're going for it. And you can link that trade or expansion of new markets into new jobs, and people can relate to what the government is doing and the sector is doing jointly with actually the outcome on the farm, on the village, on the local school, so we that has not happened. So for you to actually get a bigger picture of the good things that agriculture, you have to be interested in the sector.
You've got to be inside the sector.
You have to be
almost.
actively interested and be looking out. Then you will find the stuff. But I think that's where we're lacking. So in the absence of that, should something go wrong, it gets blown up and everyone forgets about the other stuff. I think it's a problem.
Helena?
Yeah, I'm in exact agreement. I think that's right. Everything can't be a crisis. And I think that's where agriculture got it wrong for so many years. I remember a couple of years ago, I got a press release from a sector that shall remain nameless, which it was so depressing, such a downbeat review of the year, all the crises and problems they faced. But when I looked at the numbers of this press release compared to the previous year, it took me a couple of calls to the organization to actually get them to confirm that, yes, it was a record year. They had record output. They had record exports. And I think that's what people get fatigued with the constant beat of negative, crisis-driven news. People relate to success, and we see it with our News 24 readers as well. They love agricultural stories. There's a lot of interest in it. Everybody's got an interest in food, right? So, and then the success stories. There's one of the biggest US agricultural organizations actually coach their members and representatives that in Pixar, the animation studio's techniques of telling stories. And I think we're not hearing the stories. We need to hear success stories specifically from emerging farmers, how the circle is being made bigger. I'm not naive. My dad was a farmer for a long time. My mom comes from a farm family. We've been through all the crises. I know exactly how hard it is. 1 year's agricultural success, the next year it's bust. It's a unique industry in the sense that there's not a steady growth curve. So I understand that it's not, you can't really proclaim success the whole time, but I think the agricultural sector needs to show people where the opportunity is and how more South Africans can benefit from it.
Wandile?
Oh, I thought you were still letting me breathe.
No, you've had enough time to breathe now.
I mean, my thinking would be about why are we telling a story? Because we would have to frame it in two ways. Are we trying to be educational, or is there a point at which we are trying to get it, and the emotion and the position that we are trying to influence? And I think the whole idea then of whether agriculture is telling a story comes from that. Bumi makes a point that things are happening and then we're not highlighting those similar points that Helen is saying. But I think it all gets to be rooted as to perhaps maybe we are not as clear as to what's the broader message that we are trying to get at. The level of fragmented communication that some people may be more seeing probably mirrors the underlying viewpoints of where the sector is also thinking about various positions and various policies and various programs. Then depending on what vantage point then you are coming from, you will be more prone either to emphasize news that are positive or to emphasize news that perhaps maybe are not as positive. And I think it becomes important onto that. And I do think that as much as the positive news needs to be highlighted and we need to celebrate and speak on them, there's also always a sensitivity that one has to have because there are other subsectors that may not be doing as well. I take an example, and I'm not confronting Wamnik. I was touching his hand so that he can see that I'm friendly and warm. Because I put out a post on a Substack. I write a Substack. I hope all of you are subscribed. If not, get on your phone and subscribe. The Substack, I was making a point that this is an excellent year. The sector is growing like this. Record crop. Omnik called me and said, hey, Butch, where are you farming it? Where are you seeing these things? And in his side, he was frustrated because as a livestock farmer, he was seeing the pain points of what the foot and mouth and all of those. So equally though, you also don't want to go on an off drive of the foot and mouth and say the sky is falling because a particular subsector is under pressure, and ignore the successes of the citrus being the top now in the world. So how do you balance that message? The balancing of that message goes back to say, what position are you trying to achieve? Are you putting this out on an educational, or is there a program point that you are driving? And I think all of that depends on the organizations. And Helena, by the way, she's serious about pushing agriculture. She gave me a column. I write for you. Am I still not fired? I'm still fired. So there's all of those things.
Okay. Well, Nick, that frustration is very real for people in the sector.
Only, you know what frustrates me? We're in the middle of the Free State en ons moet Engels praat.
Hoe moet jy Engels te praat nie?
By the way, Anli, this is my crypt notes because my age allows me to have crypt notes. So I think let me start with the general comment. I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
This is my little brother. He knows I'm an optimist. But I'm a realist as well. There are many good stories, and I'm going to tell you a few good stories today about small little things. It makes a hell of a difference. But there are some bad stories today. If you describe, if the people in the cities know how the life of a farmer when he gets up in the morning and he goes to sleep. There are some horror stories. There's some beautiful stories, but that is not. They haven't got a clue what's going on in the life of a farmer. The life of a farmer on the Lesotho border, for instance. Yes, you know, one dealer. I love. You know, I read all your articles. Every article I read it, and sometimes I felt that you are too optimistic. You're not telling the truth, so that's why I called you the other day. Now I want to say, you know, I'm going to say a few things that are very controversial today, but again, my age allows me to say that. Not even, you can't say that. You can't say what I say.
But we invited you knowing that you were likely to say that, so this is a safe space, right?
Now, I just want to tell you, agriculture in South Africa today is in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Deep trouble. I'm not talking about all the commodities. There are commodities that are doing fantastically, but generally, the agriculture in South Africa is in deep trouble. And there are many external factors, like the Ukraine war. But one of the biggest constraints, negatives, is a dysfunctional government. Yeah. And I'll say it in front of
especially
anybody.
Local. Especially local government.
Yeah, and especially in local government. but in national government as well. So we're but you know, in every crisis there are opportunities, and I think, you know, we need to show the resilience. We need to show the courage to start doing things differently. I think this year has been a wake-up call for all of us to start doing things, and we can talk about that later on. Thank you.
So perhaps moving from that comment onto you, Prof. Kirsten, is to say the focus is not so much on just the communication, because that's happening. Sometimes agriculture tends to communicate to itself. The people who are reading the messaging, hearing the voices, are in the same sector. So, you know, you want that to reach a little bit further. But it's more than that. What are we doing? What do we want to get out of that message? If we say there are problems at local government and at national government, and there's policy issues, we need to change things, how can that voice that we have, and that growing voice that we do have now, help us to achieve that?
I think there's probably a more substantive question here is, why do we want to communicate, and why do we want to send a message, and what is this message? What is this narrative, and why do you want to have a narrative? And then on top of that, you have a media that is selling on sensation, Elena. Sensation is the thing, and often a good story is not necessarily sensation. Problems are too depressing, and it sort of soul tapping in a way, and it doesn't really also help you to sell. So the message, because you have purposes for messaging, is one, to inform the city slickers that Nick has mentioned about the reality of agriculture, but that only takes you so far, because you also get tired of the message. And then there's the political message, in terms of ensuring that government understands the needs of the sector and implement programs that support the need of the sector. And there, farmers are known at gatherings to raise the issues and raise the problems, and sometimes communicate it wrongly, and it lands in a different way with the politician or the decision maker. So I remember, maybe just to backtrack about when Nation in Conversation started. When was that? 16 years ago? 10 years ago? I can't remember.
François, hoe lang terug?
From 2013. So it's close to 16. So I remember the reason for bringing Nation in Conversation there is to bring a message to the politician and the ordinary folk about South African agriculture and what it is all about. And it was really the threat of the land issue and the misinterpretation of the land issue that provided the impetus for Nation in Conversation in those years. And that's what the message was trying to bring about. So I think we probably need to also be sure about where we want to communicate. Is communication for political and policy purposes and program purposes? Is it messaging to communicate the dire position of the sector? Is it a message to help consumers understand the realities of agriculture? So maybe it's all of the above. But then on top of that, we also have a fragmented communication, because we are really, agriculture is per definition so clever and good at fragmented voices. And sometimes the voice is the same voice, but it's just a different color or a different ideology or a different church or a different town or a different commodity. So Nick will talk about cattle and beef, and the maize farmers are angry because it's low prices, but he's happy because it's low prices. So you see, the reality is that there's a message from a commodity perspective, there's a message from an ideological perspective, and then there's political issues, and it all gets very murky, and eventually the reporter doesn't know what to say really about the story. What are you telling me?
Sorry, Anli,
Yes.
but this is where this gets to be important also then, Prof. and Wamnik, to the point you're making about what are we trying to communicate and for what. Bumi, earlier this year, part of the communication is what ended up almost hurting us in the US market. There were political stuff that was happening, but also the messaging that we were putting up about the sector being in crisis and all of the attacks that are happening in the sectors. There are attacks that are happening, but we had pushed the message overdrive to an extent then that there are those that are exporting to that sector, which were exporting from the citrus sector and the other industries to the US, which were ending up in a situation where they were suffering from the messaging that was coming from other corners of South African agriculture, which then brings us back to the point of what are we trying to communicate and how do we sequence all of that?
I want to give a question here to Helena and Mpumelelo, being in the mainstream media space. Fragmented voices in agriculture from a different commodity, that's fine. That's not a problem. That's always going to be there. I think it's unrealistic to expect people to always say the same thing. But I think what's important to establish here is, first of all, and it's not an attack on you, Helena, because I'm part of the media, but we know if it bleeds, it leads. The media is also under pressure. There are so many competing voices out there. You are fighting for the attention of your audience to some degree. But my question is, to what extent does the media have a responsibility to look very carefully at the source of a message and to give that weighting? Because we know agriculture is used as a football during election season. Land reform, farm murders, crime, that suddenly becomes something with which you can score points, win votes. As soon as the elections are done, the people who were crying the loudest are nowhere to be seen because they got what they needed. How does the media filter out and weight those voices so that they don't influence the perception unnecessarily? Or is that not your is that not your responsibility?
Well, let me chip in. Look, typically the media's consideration is not so much all these other factors that you're talking about. They are thinking about what is the story and what is in the public interest. And what's in the public interest is not always what the public wants to hear. It may be the negative stuff, but it's in the public interest that it goes out so that it can be addressed. Even if it may be harmful to somebody, but it must get out so that it's identified, it's addressed. But someone spoke earlier about sometimes it depends what you want to communicate and how you want to communicate and the modalities that you want to use to communicate. There's a certain type of communication which is beyond the bounds of the media. You can blame the media, but some of it is beyond the bounds of the media. People talk about business-to-business relationships. So there is communication that can be agriculture to another stakeholder, which is not necessarily via the media. Stakeholder could be government, stakeholder could be another sector in the industry, it could be a policy analyst, it could be a whole bankers, it could be a whole range of stakeholders. Some of them could be international. And that's like that type of engagement. It's another form of communication targeted at a specific audience with a specific aim, away from the one where you are targeting the public or general public, which can make whatever it wants to make of it. So that's another part. The other one is where the media doesn't have complete control. I'm talking about the traditional regulated media like News 24, Times Live, and SABC and those ones. It's the social media aspect of it. We know that one of the people who drove this harsh, negative, positioning of agriculture in South Africa as a field, as a slaughterhouse, where people are slaughtered. There's a genocide in this country. It didn't come from the traditional media that is very responsible, that is accountable, that it can be told by the court, by the press council, to actually
wind its neck in.
Exactly, to monitor its messaging and to be accurate. No, it was a social media guy. News 24 exposed one of them. He was living somewhere in Gordons Bay, claiming to be a farmer. He's got no farm, nothing. His mother or father was running a cottage, a guest house. But he had this huge social media following. He would harvest pictures of people that are killed on the internet, plug them there, put on social media, on the Twitter, and say, this is what's happening in South Africa now. And Elon Musk will tweet that. And Donald Trump will get it. Then Ramaphosa goes to the Oval Office. We know what happened.
We all saw it.
So that's the form of communication which
As more powerful.
the media that is controlled, the legitimate media, has got no access to managing and all of that. So you need the legitimate media that News 24 did to expose that, which is what happened. And hopefully the guy can be prosecuted, because you can't lie to the extent that you harm South Africans. You harm people that are dependent in the sector. You harm people that would have benefited from increased investments in the sector. You harm perceptions. You harm racial harmony in the country. Basically become like the Guptas and Bell Pottinger, who basically were all about division, so that they can then benefit. Because they know that when South Africans are divided, especially on emotional issues, then they can then use that to benefit, steal money from the government, which what we call state capture, but it's theft. It happened. So all of that, communication is so instrumental, it's so important in shaping perception. So we have to take control, the legitimate media, because we can be regulated, we are accountable, then we should take preeminence. Then you can debate with me, I'm available. But you can't debate with a guy who's sitting in Gordon's Bay claiming to be a farm.
Helena, talk to us about the timing. I know you mentioned it in your first answer, but in terms of trying to quantify the opportunities that are lost when we are reactive as a sector, from a business perspective, let's talk about the money.
I think just combining your question with the previous one, and I think, Pumi, you're exactly right. I mean, for us, News 24, we only have one responsibility, and that's the truth, right? I'm in a fortunate position that I wake up every morning and all I have to do is just get as close as possible to the truth. So for us, we welcome fragmented voices in agriculture, because it gives us insights into different parties, smaller farmers, etc. But in the end, agriculture is also a numbers business. So we will always check it against the numbers to bring us to the truth. And I think that's where Wandile has done the Lord's work. I mean, he's really changed a lot for us. He, with a measured, data-driven approach to agriculture, which was, to a large extent missing for many years. We can call Wandile at any time of the night and day, and he'll give us the clear picture.
And he's always awake.
Yes. So I think for us, we want to get as close as possible to the truth, and we want, like hot air is just hot air. That's not really proper journalism. So I think you're right. I mean, I was in the White House. The damage that was done is immeasurable, and I think, to some extent, it was a good moment for agriculture in the wake of all of that, where they stood up and said, we're not victims. And it broke a bit the narrative around agriculture that was existent for a couple of years. Stood up, said, we're not victims, we believe in the South African project, which really, I think, was positive for the sector in the end.
Maybe just to link up there, because that confirms the sort of problems we have in this story about what are we actually communicating, because it is a political dimension, there's a fact dimension, there's a success story dimension. So I think we probably overthink the issue sometimes in my mind, because if you just have a proper story about what is actually happening, then it's already there. But if you use agriculture in a political way, it actually probably brought the narrative question to mind, because we've used the farm tragedy in the country as a vehicle for political to score political points, which I think was unfortunate, and it took the optimist Wandile to sort of correct the picture, Nick. That's why I was sort of over optimistic here to counter the revolution.
It's all about pendulums, eh?
So, but I think the other, fortunately, as Helena said, you managed to build facts on the whole story, and that's, if you want to talk truth, you have to talk facts, and then you need to understand your facts, and you need to understand the sources of your facts. And it's unfortunate that and sometimes fortunate, one guy, one dealer has to communicate everything about agriculture in South Africa. Why is that? Why is nobody else communicating, telling the facts?
I think
No,
there are
there's
lots of
others.
people telling
There's
stories,
others.
but they're not using perhaps the right vehicles. Look, and it's a complex discussion. I don't want us to get sort of lost on the borders because it's very complex. I want us to use a practical example, and here I'm going to come to you, Nick. Let's look, and you're in the red meat industry. The foot and mouth crisis at the moment is a very real opportunity to look at a situation that is a crisis at the moment, how we're communicating around it, and where one sector has got incredibly fragmented messaging and what the impact of that is, to try and correct maybe. So tell us what your thoughts were after yesterday's session.
Johan touched on this a while ago, and on the fragmentation and the commodities. Not in the commodities. The most fragmented commodity is the red meat industry. If you look at yesterday at
The panel
nation
discussion.
conversation
You can all watch it online.
on FMD. I mean, there's no unity. There is no one voice. I mean, there's just four or five people there, different organizations. It's the most fragmented industry in agriculture. And Wandile, you are now the envoy of agriculture and land reform. And we must talk about land reform. And you must please give the responsibility to your boss here to draw up a document to unite this red meat industry. Because if you leave it to those people, they're going to fight each other. They're all fighting for the limelight.
That's the other dilemma. It's the limelight.
Limelight. So please, Johan, do it for us.
Yeah. But I've written it many years ago.
Okay, but
Refresh the 2022.
okay. And Wandile, thank you for all the positive stories you tell. I just hope it gets to the right people. And then I want to talk to the media as well. When something bad happens, like the White House story, or FMD, or whatever they call you, I get telephone calls every minute. The moment the media don't come to us, like me, and tell me a few good stories. They don't do that. There are so many fantastic good stories. Let me give you one example. I've got 23 interns on my farm. Interns. They either got diplomas. There are some who's got master's degrees, diplomas, interns. They work there on the farm like everybody else. Like they're paid by the government. We accommodate them. We feed them, etc. You know, I've employed 3 of them already, of those interns. Wonderful, wonderful people. Now, how many? That's such a positive, wonderful story. Where does it else happen in South Africa? You must write about that.
I want to pick up on something else that you said, and you said you wanted to talk about land reform, and I think it's a good example of an almost vacuum where we haven't really heard anything about it in a while. Wandile, as the presidential envoy for land reform and agriculture, is the vacuum of numbers because nothing is happening, or are we not communicating about it? And does communicating better about land reform have the power to change policy or to speed up growth, to make a meaningful impact so that more people in this country can be employed, have access to land, can increase food production? That's what I think everyone in the country wants. You want jobs, you want people to be economically active, because that's the only way we grow.
Only can I say something? You know, I'm an activist for land reform, not dishing out land, for successful land reform. I've been fighting days and hours for successful land reform. What is happening? What is happening now? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Wandile writes about 2.5 million hectares sitting there in the 800 farms that have been vacated. What is happening about land reform in South Africa? We need, if we don't get successful land reform in South Africa, we will never be at peace. So why is it not happening? I'm asking you, why is it not happening?
All right. No. It's a serious point, Wamnik. Let me say two things. One, to Wamnik's point about land reform, and two, about just general policy making and narrative and all of that. On the first point, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. The real truth is that by 2021, it was already clear that the government had bought from the open market under the PLUS proactive land acquisition strategy program, which is under land redistribution, about 2.5 million hectares of land. Each year they are given a budget to buy more land and do all kinds of stuff. And the reality is that they've not dished out any of those hectares to black farmers with title deeds or any sort of way. The black farmers that have access there, they're still on short-term leases and they are renting it out from government. There has not been, over the past 2-3 years, and even you can stretch it back, a concerted effort to actually be able to drive land reform on that land redistribution part for the success. And as a result of that, then, no one can actually hold a point and say they are serious about transformation and they are serious about the growing of agriculture. We had made the point clear. You know it. I was at your farm with Professor Mohammed Karan when we said the next 30% growth in the GVA of agriculture in Den Creek was going to come from that particular land. Since that conversation and in Prof. Kirsten's boardroom, there hasn't been anything done.
Only successful land reform can change the face of South Africa.
Yeah.
Okay. That sector
It's
is
a
now
political
contributing
constraint.
10% to the agricultural economy. It should contribute 50%. My question is, why is it not happening? It's simple. It's a simple selection process from young talent like these interns. Give them title deed and give them the support. You know, let me say something extremely controversial. You're going to see that land being dished up just before the national elections, without support. Then it's going to be another failure. It's going to be another failure.
Well, Nick, this is what I would say to you. What has constrained the delay of that land is both the political choice and the lack of will on doing it, as well as the corruption within the government. It's a combination of those things. What we are now working on saying we will do, which is together with the Prof. Kirsten and the Land Bank and the others, is on actually rectifying that process. Many of the points that you have raised, they are well made, and I think your sentiment as to what's going on and
but
your
I
expression
want
are
to
correct
just
on that.
link this whole story to communication and
Thank you.
messages, because otherwise we're getting...
Could have heard here.
Yeah, because part of the strategy in the land reform communication is to show how slow land reform is happening. And then you say, but there's a need for expropriation. So that's the reason why you had that message continuously. And as soon as you punt the positive message about that land reform has actually progressed faster than people think because they don't do the numbers properly, then people say, but you're wrong, or you are neoliberal, or you... what do they call me sometimes? Anti-revolutionary.
Yeah, counter-revolutionary.
Counter-revolutionary, there we
yeah.
go.
So there's also a message dimension there. And now the fact that you hear nothing is either because of incompetence or there's nothing to tell.
It's the latter. It's probably it's combined. And I mean, I'm not trying to. What Omnik is raising is important because it's not only constraining transformation, but it's constraining growth. What we don't realize is that sitting on the land underutilized is the opportunity cost to what we could grow. And this is the last point, which I said, the second point I think we make a lot of mistake, and many of the people that are researchers, of thinking that policies are made only on technical understanding. and you say you're going to show the numbers and see how all of these things are done, and then with the appreciation of how numbers are, there will be policies. Nobody makes policies on technical numbers. Last point on that, linking on that, which is why communication is important, because ultimately the policy making is a political choice that is made. It's not made on a basis of only on a technical. The political choices are informed by narratives and communications that gets to be actually there. On the land reform one, yes, there is these failures, but I do think that consistently talking about the missed opportunity cost of it, bringing in urgency, and many of these things, they are important.
I want to bring that to our two media experts on my left here and say, in your experience, how does messaging, communication, narrative, perception play into either weakening any, and it doesn't have to be agriculture, any sector's seat at the table in terms of influencing policy? Because you're working against this political value system which determines this is the policy that we want. Now, as the sector influenced by that policy decision, you want to sort of almost correct it here and there to your benefit. But if your message is not correct, it's timed badly, it's fragmented, how have you seen that, and what examples have you seen in your career in the media of missed opportunities or perception really weakening that policy correction opportunity?
Well, Anle, I can tell you about something that's going to be a boiling point. That has got to do with...
You all just want to be controversial, man.
That has to do with land reform, because I'm now piggybacking on their part with the communication issue, that sometimes it's the facts on the ground where narrative is generated. So people get a warning through the news that there's something wrong here, and the policymakers don't act on time. And then in no time, the whole thing becomes something that you can no longer mitigate by proper communication. It's now boiled into a crisis. I want to make this example. So where I come from, where my family is, in Komotiport, there's an area there which was subject to land restitution. It was an application, and it was a success. Tick. Success. 2, there was a trust that was established. I think it was during Tokoti Diza's time as Minister of Agriculture. She's now the speaker trying to impeach the president. They formed a trust, a governing trust, because there are so many households. If you were to take them back to that land that they have won over, it will be chaos, because the families have grown, the old people, some of them have left, and the land is now developed. It's under farmed by RCL and other big companies, a huge plantation. So it's commercially viable and developed. Lots of jobs are created in those farms. So there was no point in saying, all of that must go, the people must come. So they accepted that they will form a partnership with the big companies that are farming there, and there's an arrangement about dividends and lease agreements. The money goes to the trust. Some of the money is going to go to the communities as dividends. Some of it is going to train people and all of that. Oh, tick, success. Now, in practice, what happens?
The trustees take the money.
So in practice, the trust becomes corrupt. Everyone does their own little thing. Some family members get kicked out sometimes if you're not, you fall out of favor. Some are put in. Some are told, no, you are not from South Africa, so your family is kicked out. The other one is good. But in the books of the government, so much sectors of land commercially viable were given back to the community. It's a success. We set up a governance structure, it's a success. But in practice, the entire thing is a failure. So I was saying to some of the guys in the area that because this thing is not benefiting the people, a narrative is going to develop, because Julius Malema is going to come here and say, we want our land back. The people, because they don't understand that they got the land back, they don't see that they got the land back. All they know that I still go to wake up in the morning to work for the white farmer. I get paid the minimum wage. I don't know that I own the land. I get nothing from owning the land. So what will happen is that they're going to march there and want to expropriate their own land. And there'll be a big fuss about land reform and all of that. So I'm talking about something that can generate into a narrative. And it's a very interesting example because the narrative is going to go against what the government says is a success. So these are some of the things. I mean, it's already happened with another community. It's called, I think it's called Mawewe or something, where Richard Spoor, the lawyer, was trying to help the community fix the governance thing in this. Yeah. So these failures are giving land reform a bad name. They're giving land reform, and then the whole story now is that land reform is not working.
Only you're absolutely right. There are 1,500 of these CPAs, what they call CPAs, community, where land is given to a community. Not 10% of them are working. It's the same with the tribal system. There's a continuous fight in the tribe, between who's the legitimate chief. I can give you examples. Chief Mankurani and the Mankuranis and Town. That fight between of who is the legitimate chief is as old as the fight between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It will never be solved. So, these CPAs cannot work. They will never work. The pace of land reform is not the problem. The problem is the how.
Yeah.
You can't give land to somebody without support, financial support, without experience, mentoring, and training. I mean, we can now go and issue 2.5 million hectares to. There needs to be money for. There needs to be a title deed, so they can go to the bank. There needs to be some infrastructure, mentoring, training, and monitoring. Otherwise,
Here's part of my point, Wimnik, is that we keep saying these things. Various people keep saying these things, but are we not saying them to the right people at the right time, in the right way, to get the success that we want to see? And I want to bring us back to that question about how do we communicate better to get what we want? And maybe part of that is, do we sit around the same table wanting the same things? Because at a very broad level, everyone in agriculture wants to see growth. And maybe the question is to hear, I want to bring you in, Helena, because we didn't just bring you to Nampo for shopping. I want to get your insights.
She gives
what
me the
makes a sector credible in the eyes of the public? When does the public look at a sector and go, wow, this kind of messaging makes me trust these people? Because I think sometimes the public doesn't trust agriculture because we're saying, ons praat de mekaar.
Maybe I can respond by with something, just pushing it in a different direction, and that's the limits of the narrative and the limit of public perception. I think agriculture has to be very clear about what it wants from government and what it can achieve through public sentiment, which other industries have shown us is not that much. You can have the whole of South Africa behind something and many of the politicians, maybe most of the politicians, but government isn't always a rational player. So what of these agricultural specific issues need to go to the Constitutional Court, need to go to court, need legal action? And maybe I'm just a bit cynical about this, but I do think that narrative isn't enough. There needs to be a proper strategy and to see where the results can be achieved. And so that's my view.
Because we're in the marketing space now, no? And we're really not wanting to market the sector. It's about communication and messages for purpose. And that's why I come back to my initial point. I think everybody in agriculture worries about problem solving and dealing with issues that will secure the future of the sector so that you can invest. And then the issues of land, the issues of commodities, the issues of policies and programs come into play. And we should also recognize that agriculture has also got this legacy of before 94 of controlled marketing and control system where you can you can put your hands on the table and say, we want this, and the price is fixed, and the things are changed, and the minister implements and so on. The whole political and organizational landscape of agriculture has changed. So the things are different. And the issues of relevance to farmers are things that are not even in control of the Minister of Agriculture. So it doesn't help to worry about the Minister of Agriculture. They know there's a guy called Park Stow in trade of industry, but they're not sure whether it's important for agricultural trade. So the reality is that we are sort of bring into play a whole lot of issues because the media cannot cover our message, cannot bring our message forward because they report on events and happenings and maybe a success story here and there. But in the end of the day, our message is to get a perception of the sector on the one hand. That can be a media role, but I think the social media is playing a much bigger role now. How many TikTok followers do you have? 100,000? What?
I think what the professor is trying to say.
Dodge that one.
The most important thing, the public communication helps in raising the profile so that you are listened and you are taken seriously on that. Yeah. Beyond that, it goes to the strategies and the direct stakeholder communication that we are able to put out. But I think the other thing, if you communicate things accidentally, they are not going. You do need a little bit of a consistency on what exactly you are saying and be persistent on that, and that backed with some of the strategies. But there are limits again, in a sense of the political will about how do you get around some of those things of getting things done.
But I want to give you an example, and I'm going to come to you now, Johan. I was chatting to some people in agriculture prior to this year's Nation in Conversation, and we got such excellent feedback that after last year's session on infrastructure, where both Minister Steenhuisen and Minister Dean McPherson were here on the panel, committees were set up, action, and somehow a conversation here made the kind of connections and sparked the kind of backroom conversations that were necessary to make real on-the-ground change. And now I'm not saying it like, an hour of Nation in Conversation sparked a national revolution where we no longer have potholes. I'm not saying that at all. However, conversations can be powerful. Communication, I'm a communication nut. I love that humans relate to each other.
I think you're right, because the conversations always helps to clear the air, because you can always find that things are murky through media, social media, etc. But when you engage face to face and you actually understand one another, it helps a lot. And I think that's probably where the origin of Nation in Conversation is, to bring that conversation forward so that one are put on the spot and say, but talk sense for a change. Don't talk ideology.
And stand by your words.
I remember Mpulele, were you not the one that was hired by Dan Creek to go to Free State Conference back in 2014 to improve the Sowetans publication of agriculture?
No, he didn't hire me. He invited me to speak at the Free State Agri Congress.
Yes.
Incidentally, I was also invited not long ago by the Agri SA Northwest. And the reason is that they want to know what's happening in the political environment, because they say, as farmers, they're isolated from the mainstream media. And they watch the news, but some of it doesn't make sense because they are in the interest of farming. They're interested in farming. But anyway, I want to move to, you asked a question, I think we owe you an answer, Anli. You must not run away from
Which
that.
question was this now?
But the best way is to improve communication. I want to use the land reform story again. The narrative around land reform has been built around, you have to give certain people land who were previously disadvantaged and dispossessed of the land. That's land reform. It's fine, it's a perfect definition, but there's another definition which has been forgotten as a consequence of overemphasizing that narrative, which is that communal land. Nobody's talking about part of turning communal land that is lying fallow, making it productive, is actually part of land reform. People are not talking about that.
Land tenure.
And land tenure and all of those things. And making sure that there's irrigation schemes and all of that, people can turn around the land and make it productive. As a consequence of us not talking about that, I can tell you now, in some villages, if you go around the country, what used to be farmland is now being invaded, is now human settlements.
Desert.
And then more you take that communal land which was for farming and you turn it in human settlement, the more there's pressure on the other aspect of land reform, because people are now focusing on the fact that even the little patch I have is no longer available. So there's no safeguarding of the communal land so that it's not encroached for non-farming purposes. 1, 2, there's no conversion of that land to productive capacity. So it's because the land reform narrative has been narrowed to a particular angle, and all of us fell for it. The other aspect that I want to raise is the question of state capacity. I think the media doesn't deal with the state capacity issue as aggressively as it should. Womnik is referring to it. And that's why I sent him a message the other day. He wrote this outstanding article about that factory that used to produce foot and mouth disease vaccines in South Africa, and how over time it eroded that capacity to produce vaccines here. We were never supposed to import vaccines from Argentina or anywhere in the world and end up getting wrong spec. So we're supposed to manufacture these things here locally. We have failed as a media to highlight the erosion of state capacity up until we had a crisis. And now because he's got insights, he wrote beautifully about how that capacity has been wiped out. I sent him a note to say, well done.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that the media needs to focus on. Unfortunately, it's the kind of negative message you have to send out as a say, hey, there's a red flag.
The root problem.
So that we can fix the root problem. Not as a way of saying, this government is a failure, damn them. No,
exactly.
You're raising it, there's something wrong here. Can people here come and sort it out?
So I want us to get some questions from the floor, and just a reminder, because we, in our own communication here, we might have gotten slightly murky in a very philosophical issue here.
Can I touch on one more point?
Absolutely, but we are running out of time, and
I
people.
promise you I talk too much. No, let me. The question was what does agriculture want from government? That was the question. Okay. Now, there's a thing called the confidence index, agricultural confidence index, done by him and the IDC, etc., on a quarterly basis. It's been measured from 2002 continuously. Now, I don't know how many people know about this confidence index, but during COVID, and now this is mainly driven by climate, by droughts, except for the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. During COVID, the confidence index was at its highest, at 75 points. All the other sectors declined. Agriculture was the only sector that showed, without shedding any unemployment. Just after COVID, it dropped from 75 until minus 40, I think. Why was that? It's got nothing to do with agriculture. And this is what we want from government. It's got everything to do with a dysfunctional government. Eskom, Transnet, crime, corruption, all those things. The farmer's got no control over. It's everything got to do with government, and that's what agriculture wants. We want a functional government. Now, then it recovered again in 2000 last year, beginning of last year. It dropped again until minus 10. Now, it's going to drop to minus 50 next quarter. Why?
I'm sending the questionnaires out next
because of government failed with foot and mouth, with animal health. I mean, he produced a report in 2022, which he said animal health was dysfunctional. You remember that report? It's been dysfunctional for 2 decades. So that's all we want from the government. We just want a functional government. That's all we want.
Okay. Let's get some questions from the audience. Anyone? We have a question over here. Bring us back, brave soul.
Thank you for this panel. I've wondered if I should come, and I'm very glad I did. I'm Gerard Mostert. I've run incubator in Tonga, a sugarcane incubator to train up-and-coming small farmers. And I think we don't have a clue how difficult it is to farm. Not a clue. I think there's generation farmers that's in farming for 5 years, 5 generations, and then they can't make it. To farm is an enormous amount of experience that is put together, and we think we can give people farms and expect them to be successful without having some way of training. And after 10 years, the government stopped it because I'm not BEE. I'm a guy with 2 guys, but we're too white. And to train farmers, and because we were paid by Department of Trade and Industry, we were CEDA function. And then they just say, the government can't pay you. So I said, how can I finish? They say, no, you must be a Section 21 company and you must have so many board members and it must be, we will choose it. So I agree. The problem is with the policies. It's if we want to have successful up-and-coming farmers, it's the most difficult trade you can be in. There's no more. I'm coming now from the Western Cape. You can see how it is. I've got one farmer lost 100 hectares of citrus by the floods. How will he recover? It's a very, very difficult industry to be successful, and to be successful you need how to do it. You need people to train you. I'm very happy with what Monique is doing to bring in people. We need much more of that. But we need government assistance in a much bigger. We had 100 farmers that I trained. Every year 30 goes out, 30 comes in. It's a 3-year training. After that, I get Land Bank, will take the guys on. They can buy another guy with 10 hectares, they can grow. They've killed it. So the policy is the problem.
Perhaps the question that we asked in this session is completely wrong. If narrative plays such a small role in influencing policy, maybe we shouldn't worry so much about the narrative, and maybe Wandile needs to tell us what can have a much bigger impact on policy.
Even he doesn't get it right.
But you know, Anli, there's something that is, I found it innovative, very creative, that the business sector created recently. Perhaps agriculture should look at it.
BLSA or BUSA.
Yeah, BUSA, Business Leadership SA. They have been engaged with the government on various reforms to deal with some of the things that Monique is talking about, fixing Transnet, fixing ESCOM, and all of that. And they created this thing called the Reform Tracker. So every time the government does something or doesn't do something, they measure it and they've got charts, how far the government is on the relaxation of this regulation, on this policy. The government promised to do the following, how far are they? I find it a very innovative tool, not only for themselves as a business to measure the impact of their demands to the government, but also assist the government in monitoring and evaluating its own policy outcomes and progress. And it holds everyone accountable in a way. So I would suggest part of creating a narrative and a nice communication arrangement about how far are we is to develop a reform tracker of that kind in agriculture.
It's an interesting point you're making, because it could be the BLSA model could be an interesting model whereby your agricultural companies and your organizations get together and but what they did is also they provide expertise and funds for the various activities. So it will be interesting to see how agriculture put their money where their mouth is, to see where they intervene. And it could be interesting, whether it's in vaccine production or whether it's in road fixing. So that's a nice model, but we need to be strategic and to think how we can
I'm thinking, for example, he says he's training young people.
So the training program and so
So
on.
he would feed there to say, I've got 100 people on my farm training in these are the different skills I have. Another farmer will do the same thing. Collectively, we'll know that we have got so many hundreds of people that have been on training in the different skills for the last 24 months. They now want to exit the training. They want farms. And we have them. Here's the list of people wanting farms. One delay. Can the government deliver so many hectares?
So, Ali, I think the point is also that you've made the argument now, the narrative and messaging is probably not the key issue here. I think we've improved the messaging over time, consumer-wise. People in the cities understand more or less what agriculture is about. The youth is now following TikTok and they know what is happening. The issue is really about trying to understand the real needs of the sector and converting that into actions and programs. And there's a disconnect, not because our message is poor and because our process is poor, it's because of the way that our government system is structured and how it functions. And how many people do real work in the department. There are about 6,000 in the Department of Agriculture. I think between 5 of us, we can probably do the same work that they do. So it's just frightening. So
that's the 5 of you.
The 5 of us. And the 5 of you.
So the point is, things are getting delayed. It's the tasks and the key performance areas are wrongly designed, and so to fear of the Auditor General, you rather do nothing, because otherwise you've done something that
a void is better than a cross.
Exactly. So
we are running out of time. Do we have one more question? We've got 2 more questions. Fantastic. Yeah, we haven't been boring. And after these questions, then we're going to get some quick final thoughts, and then we'll call it a day. We don't want to keep you here forever and ever.
Thank you very much, Annelie. My name's Biandri Bad, and I'm a specialist in a field called sanitary and phytosanitary measures, but from the legal perspective. You've been talking a lot this morning about narrative and that type of thing, and I think there's fragmentation at a different level as well, not just amongst farmers. So when it comes to SPS measures, Wimnik, you spoke about animal health. One of the big problems we have is we aren't proactively acting on that. We don't have a legislative framework, which was my research, which enables that position. But trying to speak to people within the industry, within decision-making positions, it's really difficult, because that narrative of why a field of law like sanitary and phytosanitary measures is so essential to agriculture. Although obvious when you've got foot and mouth disease and that type of thing, we tend to focus on, well, biosecurity being only a science thing or being only an economic thing because it costs you money. But we miss the other disciplines, and that comes all the way back to the university level, where these different fields, such as law, such as economics, they don't speak to each other in a way that makes it sensible for that communication to flow out of the learning institutions into a place where we then get to a point where you do have a group of multidisciplinary experts sitting around a table able to proactively work on this. I mean, one of my great missions is communicating this to people in very different industries within agriculture, when I say farmers or industry bodies or whoever that might be. But when we talk about a narrative and communication and what comes after that, I often sit at panels like this or on panels like this, and then we've had this great conversation and we leave. It's a very big part of why I went into consulting as opposed to staying in academia, is because it's quite disheartening to have these really great points made, but very little action on that. So I don't really have a question, but if there's a reflection on that from anyone on the panel, I have spoken to some people on this panel about that before.
Super.
Yeah.
If you would pass the mic on, and we can get a couple of questions at the same time and reflect in conclusion.
Thank you very much. I'm Giel Becker. I'm also a farmer. I'm very glad the way this session has turned out, become the media slapping themselves over the finger about what they are writing, which is very good. So there are a lot of good stories out there, and I don't, pointing the fingers to the farmers, always telling the bad stories. That is always what hits the media, and that is what sells, especially daily newspapers. So I'm happy to be part of this workshop that just taken place here. And my request would be that tell the whole story. I think you actually tell where it actually came from. Don't tell an incident. Tell the whole story. Wandile report on the effect. Talk about the cause. FMD has got a 20-year history. It just didn't happen last year. And everything collapsed. Bit by bit, but it was never reported in a nice sequential manner. But the history is there. Maybe it's time to write that case study up, and a nice academic case study, it can be, of exactly how it happened, how things can drastically go wrong, and how not to do it in future. Currently, how it is handled. Yesterday, I listened to the briefing, and it's all smoke and mirrors, but nobody realized that. The Section 10 was on the table at the end of January. It took 2.5 months in a court case to get it signed.
I listened.
No, it's absolutely terrible. So, Wandile, I love your stuff, but that's the end result that you're reporting how it went. We want it a bit earlier. And I think that's a challenge to the media. Thank you.
Can I throw something in there as well? At the same time, it's good that we challenge each other. That's how we stay on top and how we improve. From a media perspective, and having been in the media for the last 20 years, one of our gripes is with consumers of the media. Because you can tell us, write the whole story, but then what about the public who's fallen into this trap of consuming media like it's knickknacks? You're sitting in front of the TV, you watch whatever catches your attention momentarily, you consume a snippet. You don't read newspapers, you look at digital articles, and not discriminating between trusted platforms and anyone who's got a cell phone and is saying something, reading only the headlines. So we need to educate ourselves as broader consumers of the media to say, not just consuming media and news based on what is convenient for me or what catches my eye, but to critically consume information, to go, hang on, where is the deeper story? It's out there somewhere. Someone's written it. Let me find more information instead of just relying on that headline to go, ooh, daar gaan 'n tekort wees aan aardappels. Kom ek gaan koop 20 sakkies. So that responsibility extends to consumers of news, the creators of news, the media, people in agriculture, agricultural businesses, farmers, organizations. And I think if anything has come out of today's session, if I can wrap it up very quickly because we are at the end here, is don't stop communicating. Understand that whatever you say it with responsibility. Understand what you're trying to achieve. Stand together with people who have the same ideas, fight with people who have opposite ideas, because those fights ultimately play into this bigger realm of telling agriculture stories, and don't forget about the good stories. And maybe if I can go around the circle, and if each of you can add a phrase to that.
You've done a wonderful job now. You've closed it properly in my mind.
Any additions?
Yeah, well, I think she deserves an answer, the consultant.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah.
I wasn't, ek is nie bevoeg om te antwoord nie.
Not an answer, but a reflection, because she didn't ask a question. I think the advantage of Nation in Conversation, the way I understand it, is that there's a lot of agri companies that are following us here present and also virtually. And it's in their interest to take some of the suggestions that are here and convert them into action. See if there's any value they can extract from this, and see if they can implement in their own way, modify and do whatever. Internally in their own companies, also in relationship to others and other stakeholders. That's the value of these conversations, so that it's not academic, as you say.
We also have technology at our disposal. So I'm going to ask our technical team to put a QR code up now.
Only next year, try to have one session where people like the gentleman sitting second on the second row from this side, and many others that are involved in policy drafting and making, to actually come on stage to understand how some of these programs are developed. Because one of the things I came up with appreciation of is that we don't appreciate much how policies are actually developed. We have a rough idea that we think ideas are moving in this way, there's this rational way of all of and we de-emphasize the political consideration, which for stakeholders and the businesses, you sort of have to think about them as you are drafting your strategy. Say, this is what I want to do, this is what the numbers are looking like, but what other conversations are happening there, and how do I plug in those conversations to shift the things towards the direction I want? I don't think people actually have that deeper appreciation of how these things evolve.
It's a very good idea. If you have ideas, topics you want to hear about, feedback on this session, feedback on any of the other sessions, feedback on the program, take a snap of the QR code, share your ideas with us. Technology is there to help us share information, to form how we communicate, and we welcome your participation. On that note, thank you so much for being here in person. Thank you for taking an hour and a half of your time, listening to us and our philosophical ramblings. We've enjoyed being here with you. And thank you to our panelists for your time, for your very far drive in the traffic this morning, and for all of your dedication and your insights into the topic. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.